The crowd fell silent as Zephyr Fielding strode into the dusty saloon, her head held high despite the fresh bruise blooming across her cheekbone. It was the summer of 1876 in Redemption Creek, a small but bustling town at the edge of Wyoming Territory, where the railroad had brought prosperity to some and misery to others. Zephyr was among the latter, though you'd never guess it from the determined gleam in her hazel eyes. "Well, look who's back," a man's voice drawled from the corner. "Thought Jameson would have taught you your place by now." Zephyr didn't flinch as she approached the bar. "Water, please," she said to the barkeep, ignoring the snickers that rippled through the room. "Ain't got no water for proud women who don't know their station," the barkeep spat, not bothering to look up from the glass he was polishing. "Then I'll take whiskey," she replied, voice unwavering, "and a room for the night." The saloon doors swung open again, bringing with them a gust of hot summer air and the imposing figure of a man Zephyr had never seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered with a weathered face that spoke of years under the unforgiving western sun, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was. His dark eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Zephyr before he approached the bar. "I'll have what the lady's having," he said, his voice deep and smooth like aged bourbon. "And I'm paying for hers too." The barkeep hesitated, glancing between them. "You don't want to be associating with that one, mister. Trouble follows her like flies on a carcass." The stranger merely placed a silver dollar on the counter. "I believe I said I'll have what she's having." Zephyr turned to face him fully, her eyes narrowing. "I don't need charity, especially not from someone I don't know." A hint of a smile played at the corner of his mouth as he extended his hand. "Kieran O'Malley, madam. Now we're not strangers. Being acquainted doesn't mean I need your help," she replied, though she accepted the handshake. His palm was calloused but warm against hers. "No," Kieran agreed, retrieving the two glasses the barkeep reluctantly set before them. "But I reckon everyone needs a friend in a room full of wolves." Zephyr took the offered whiskey and downed it in one swift motion, suppressing a grimace at the burn. "You're not from around here." "Just rode in this morning," he confirmed. "Looking for work. I hear the Henderson Ranch is hiring." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Henderson won't hire you if he sees you talking to me. And why is that, miss?" "Fielding, Zephyr Fielding." She touched her bruised cheek self-consciously. "Let's just say I've made some powerful enemies by speaking my mind." Kieran's gaze lingered on her injury, his expression darkening momentarily. "That's a mighty pretty name for a mighty brave woman." The way he said it, without a trace of mockery, made something flutter in Zephyr's chest, a feeling she promptly tried to smother. She'd learned the hard way not to trust charming strangers, especially not men who looked like they could break your heart with a smile. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. O'Malley," she said, rising from her stool. "I have business to attend to." He nodded, watching as she negotiated with the reluctant barkeep for a room key. When she turned to leave, their eyes met once more across the dimly lit room. There was something in his gaze that made her pause, not pity, which she despised, but something else. Something like respect. Zephyr hurried up the narrow staircase to her rented room, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her. She had bigger problems than a handsome drifter with kind eyes. Tomorrow she would need to find work, and in a town where half the men wanted her gone and the other half wanted her broken, that wouldn't be easy. Little did she know that Kieran O'Malley wasn't a man who gave up easily, nor was he someone who could stand by and watch injustice unfold. Their paths were destined to cross again sooner rather than later. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Zephyr had been awake for hours, stitching a tear in her only other dress by the faint light seeping through the window. Her fingers worked nimbly despite their soreness, a skill she'd learned from necessity rather than choice. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind. Jameson Henderson, the wealthy cattle baron who practically owned the town, had cornered her behind the general store. His proposal, if one could call it, that had been the same as always, become his mistress, and he'd ensure she never wanted for anything. Her refusal had earned her the bruise she now covered with a light dusting of powder. "Proud as ever, ain't you?" he'd sneered, his breath hot against her face. "That pride will be the death of you, girl." Maybe he was right, but Zephyr would rather die standing than live on her knees. Her mother hadn't raised her to be any man's property, despite what the law might say about a woman's place. Before consumption had claimed her 3 years ago, Mary Fielding had instilled in her daughter a fierce independence that Zephyr couldn't abandon, even when it brought her pain. A knock at her door startled her out of her reverie. Cautiously, she approached it. "Who is it, Martha Sullivan, dear?" "I've brought you some breakfast." Relief washed over her as she opened the door to reveal the plump, middle-aged woman holding a tray of food. Martha was one of the few people in town who still showed Zephyr kindness, despite her husband being Henderson's foreman. "You're an angel, Martha," Zephyr said, accepting the offering gratefully. "Nonsense. Just doing what any decent Christian would." Martha stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her eyes immediately went to Zephyr's cheek. "He's getting worse, isn't he?" Zephyr shrugged, sitting down to eat the hot porridge. "Nothing I can't handle. Child, there's handling trouble and there's inviting it. You keep turning him down publicly and what? I should accept." Zephyr shook her head firmly. "I won't be his mistress, Martha." "Not for all the comfort in the world," Martha sighed, sitting beside her on the narrow bed. "I know, dear, your spirit is what makes you special, but it's also what makes you vulnerable." She lowered her voice. "I heard something at home last night. Sullivan was talking about Henderson making arrangements with the sheriff. I fear they're planning something." A chill ran down Zephyr's spine. Sheriff Wade was notoriously corrupt, taking bribes from Henderson to look the other way whenever the cattle baron's men caused trouble. "What kind of arrangements?" "I don't know exactly, but it involves the claim to your father's land." Martha took Zephyr's hand. "You need to be careful, maybe even consider leaving town for a while." The thought made Zephyr's stomach clench. Her father's small homestead was all she had left of her parents. After his death in a mining accident last winter, she'd struggled to maintain it alone, but it was hers. The deed was in her name, one of the few rights her father had secured for her before his passing. "I can't leave," she said firmly. "That land is my legacy, it's all I have." Martha looked like she wanted to argue, but instead patted Zephyr's hand. "Then at least try to keep a low profile, and if you need help, you come to me, promise." "I promise," Zephyr agreed, though they both knew she was unlikely to ask for assistance. After Martha left, Zephyr finished her breakfast and dressed for the day in her freshly mended blue calico dress. She had to find legitimate work, that would allow her to keep her land and her dignity intact. The general store had already refused to hire her, as had the hotel and the laundry. Perhaps the new dressmaker, Mrs. Chen, would be willing to take her on. The Chinese woman was an outsider herself and might be more sympathetic. Zephyr was halfway down the saloon stairs when she spotted Kieran O'Malley in deep conversation with the barkeep. Sunlight streaming through the windows caught the auburn highlights in his dark hair, and for a moment she allowed herself to admire his strong profile. Then, remembering herself, she straightened her shoulders and continued down. Both men looked up at her approach. The barkeep scowled, but Kieran's face lit up with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Miss Fielding," he greeted her, "I was just asking about you." "Oh," she replied, trying to sound nonchalant, "and why would you be doing that?" "I heard there might be a small parcel of land for sale outside town. Thought you might know something about it, being a local and all." The barkeep snorted. "She ain't no local, just a stubborn gal who don't know when to quit." Zephyr lifted her chin. "I was born here, Mr. Davis. My family has been in this valley for 20 years. And soon enough you'll be gone like the rest of your kin," Davis retorted. "Mark my words." Kieran's eyes hardened, but before he could speak, Zephyr touched his arm lightly. "If you're interested in land, Mr. O'Malley, I'd be happy to show you what's available. I know this area well." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "I'd be much obliged, Miss Fielding." They left the saloon together, stepping into the bustling main street of Redemption Creek. The town had grown substantially since the railroad's arrival 2 years prior, with new businesses sprouting up alongside the original establishments. Miners, cowboys, and settlers mingled on the wooden sidewalks, creating a cacophony of voices and movement. "You didn't really want to know about land for sale, did you?" Zephyr asked once they were out of earshot of the saloon. Kieran chuckled. Can't fool you, can I? No, I wanted to make sure you were all right after last night. That barkeep has a mean streak. Davis is harmless compared to others in this town, she replied. But thank you for your concern. They walked in companionable silence for a moment, dodging a group of boisterous children playing with a hoop. I got the job at Henderson's ranch, Kieran said eventually, starting tomorrow. Zephyr stopped abruptly. You did, even after being seen with me, he nodded. Seems my reputation with horses precedes me. They're desperate for someone who can break the new Mustangs they rounded up. You're a horse trainer, she asked, impressed despite herself, among other things. I've worn many hats in my 30 years. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Been a ranch hand, a cavalry scout, even tried my hand at prospecting for a spell. What brings you to Redemption Creek then? It's hardly the center of opportunity these days. Something shifted in his expression. Let's just say I'm looking for a fresh start, same as many out here. Zephyr sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West had secrets, herself included. Well, I hope Henderson treats you better than he treats most, she said, resuming their walk. Just watch yourself around him. He doesn't take kindly to people who cross him. People like you, Kieran asked quietly. She gave him a sad smile. I refused him. In his mind, that's unforgivable. Is that how you got that? He gestured toward her bruised cheek, his voice tight with anger. Henderson doesn't like being told no, especially not by a woman. Zephyr shrugged as if it didn't matter, though they both knew it did. He says my pride will be the death of me. Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her directly. The intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. That's what I love about you, he said, the words slipping out as if he couldn't help himself. Your pride, your courage, this world tries to break women like you, but you keep standing. For a moment, Zephyr was speechless, warmth blooming in her chest at his words. No one had spoken to her like that before, like her defiance was something to admire rather than correct. You hardly know me, Mr. O'Malley, she finally managed, though her voice lacked conviction. I know enough, he replied simply. Then, as if realizing how forward he'd been, he cleared his throat. Forgive me, that was presumptuous. It was, she agreed, but she couldn't help adding, though not entirely unwelcome. A grin spread across his face, transforming his features. It struck Zephyr that Kieran O'Malley might be the most handsome man she'd ever met and potentially the most dangerous to her peace of mind. I should go, she said reluctantly. I need to see about a job at the new dressmaker's shop. May I call on you sometime? He asked. Properly, I mean. The question surprised her. Men in Redemption Creek either avoided her entirely or approached with dishonorable intentions. None had ever asked to court her properly. I live at the old Fielding homestead about 3 miles east of town, she found herself saying. Though I can't promise I'll be there long if Henderson has his way. Kieran's expression grew serious. Is he trying to take your land? He's been trying since my father died. Says a woman can't manage property alone. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. He's wrong, I can and I will. I believe you, Kieran said, and the simple certainty in his voice gave her strength. But everyone needs allies, Miss Fielding, even the most capable among us. She studied him, trying to determine his motives. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. That had been her experience anyway, but something about Kieran O'Malley felt different. The way he looked at her was direct, honest, without the leering quality she'd grown accustomed to. I should warn you, she said finally. Being my ally won't win you any favors in this town. His smile returned, slow and genuine. I've never much cared for popular opinion, Miss Fielding. Zephyr, she corrected him. If we're to be allies, you might as well use my given name. Zephyr, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. It suits you free and untamed like the wind itself. She fought the blush threatening to color her cheeks. Good day, Kieran. I wish you luck at Henderson's tomorrow. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her, and for the first time in months, Zephyr felt something other than dread about the future. It was a dangerous feeling, hope especially in a place like Redemption Creek, but she couldn't deny the tiny spark that had ignited within her. Little did she know that both their lives were about to change irrevocably, their fates intertwined in ways neither could predict. The dressmaker's shop smelled of new fabric and strong tea. Lily Chen, a petite woman with intelligent eyes and nimble fingers, listened attentively as Zephyr explained her situation. "You sew well?" Mrs. Chen asked, examining the mending on Zephyr's sleeve. "My mother taught me. I've made most of my own clothes since I was 12, Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Good stitches, even strong." She set down the fabric and met Zephyr's gaze directly. "I need help, yes, but Henderson man he come yesterday, say no hire Fielding woman or lose customers." Zephyr's heart sank. "I understand, thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Chen." The dressmaker frowned, tapping her fingers against the counter. "My husband say America land of opportunity, but opportunity only for some, She lowered her voice. "You come back door tomorrow morning, early we try." Hope bloomed in Zephyr's chest. "You mean it?" "Even with Henderson's threats." "Henderson not only powerful man in town," Mrs. Chen said with a sly smile. "Railroad bring many customers, fine ladies from East who care about style, not gossip. You work in back, I work in front, we see how it goes." Impulsively, Zephyr reached across the counter and squeezed Mrs. Chen's hand. "Thank you, you won't regret it." Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Zephyr decided to stop by the general store before heading home. Her supplies were running dangerously low, and now that employment was a possibility, she could justify spending a little of her dwindling savings. The shop bell tinkled as she entered, and the cheerful sound contrasted sharply with the immediate silence that fell. Three women who had been chatting by the dry goods counter turned to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "Well, if it isn't the proud Miss Fielding," one of them drawled. Beatrice Wilson, the banker's wife, had never approved of Zephyr's independent ways. "Still walking around like you own the place, I see." Zephyr ignored her, approaching the counter where Mr. Peterson stood eyeing her warily. "Afternoon, Mr. Peterson. I need flour, coffee, and some salt pork, please." Peterson glanced nervously at the women before responding. "Cash up front today, Miss Fielding, no credit." "Of course," she replied, placing coins on the counter. She'd expected as much. While Peterson gathered her items, Beatrice Wilson sidled closer. "I heard Jameson Henderson paid you a visit yesterday," she said, voice dripping with false concern. "Such a shame you continue to rebuff his generosity. A woman in your position can't afford to be choosy." "I wasn't aware my personal affairs were of such interest to you, Mrs. Wilson," Zephyr replied coolly. "When a woman lives alone, everything she does is everybody's business," Beatrice sniffed. "It's unseemly. Your poor mother would be horrified to see what's become of you." The mention of her mother hit Zephyr like a physical blow. She gripped the counter edge to steady herself, fighting to maintain her composure. "My mother taught me that a woman's worth isn't determined by her attachment to a man," she said evenly. "Perhaps yours taught you differently." Beatrice's face flushed an ugly red. "How dare you? My mother was a lady, unlike some I could mention." "Here's your things, Miss Fielding," Peterson interrupted, pushing a small bundle across the counter. "Best be on your way now." Zephyr gathered her purchases, desperate to escape the stifling atmosphere. As she turned to leave, the shop door opened and Sheriff Wade entered. His narrow eyes locked onto her immediately. "Miss Fielding," he said, touching the brim of his hat in mock politeness. "Just the person I was hoping to find." A sense of foreboding washed over her. "What can I do for you, Sheriff? Got some papers for you to look over." He withdrew an official-looking document from his vest. "Seems there's been some question about the legitimacy of your claim to the Fielding property." Zephyr's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "There's no question about it. The deed is registered in my name, signed and witnessed by Judge Miller himself before he passed." "Well now, that's the issue, ain't it?" Wade's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile on a less reptilian face. "Judge Miller's records were damaged in that fire last month." "Convenient, some might say." "Convenient for whom?" Zephyr challenged, aware of the women watching the exchange with avid interest. "The point is," Wade continued, ignoring her question, "without proper documentation, your claim is in dispute. Mr. Henderson has filed a counterclaim based on a debt your father allegedly owed him before his passing." "That's absurd. My father owed Henderson nothing," Wade shrugged. "That's for the territorial court to decide now. In the meantime, I'm serving you notice that you have 30 days to produce documentation supporting your ownership or vacate the property." He held out the paper. Zephyr took it with trembling fingers, scanning the legal jargon that essentially confirmed her worst fears. This was Henderson's plan all along, not just to intimidate her, but to take everything she had left. "This isn't justice," she said quietly. "This is theft." "Careful, Miss Fielding," Wade warned. "That kind of talk could be construed as slander against a respected businessman." Beatrice Wilson tittered behind her fan. "Perhaps if you'd been more accommodating to Mr. Henderson's proposals, this unfortunate situation could have been avoided." Something snapped inside Zephyr. She whirled to face the women. "Is that what you call it, accommodating? Should I have allowed him to use me as he pleased just to keep what's rightfully mine? Is that your definition of a lady, Mrs. Wilson?" The shop fell deathly silent. Even the sheriff seemed taken aback by her outburst. "You've made your choice, Miss Fielding," Wade finally said. "Now you'll live with the consequences." Clutching her purchases and the eviction notice, Zephyr pushed past him and out onto the street. Tears threatened, but she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had 30 days to fight this injustice, 30 days to find proof that her claim was legitimate before Henderson took everything. The walk home was long and lonely, the weight of her troubles far heavier than the bundle in her arms. By the time the small Fielding homestead came into view, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the land she might soon lose. The cabin her father had built with his own hands stood solid and weathered, a testament to his skill and perseverance. The small barn housed her only livestock, an elderly milk cow named Bessie and the sturdy mare, Willow, that had been her mother's pride and joy. A vegetable garden, carefully tended, provided much of her food during the growing season. It wasn't much by most standards, but to Zephyr, it was everything: her heritage, her home, her independence. The thought of Henderson taking it made her physically ill. As she approached the cabin, a movement near the barn caught her eye. Instantly alert, she set down her packages and reached for the small derringer she kept in her pocket. Living alone had taught her caution. "Who's there?" she called out. "Show yourself." A tall figure stepped out from the shadow of the barn, hands raised placatingly. "It's just me," Kieran O'Malley's voice carried across the yard. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by confusion. "What are you doing here?" He approached slowly, as if giving her time to object. "I rode out to Henderson's ranch to get settled before starting work tomorrow. On my way back, I thought I'd make sure you got home safe." He gestured toward the small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "Brought these as a proper calling gift, but you weren't here. I was just about to leave them on your porch." The simple kindness of the gesture, coming after such a difficult day, nearly undid her. Zephyr swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. That's very thoughtful," she managed. Kieran studied her face, concern evident in his expression. "What's happened?" "You look like you've received bad news." Without conscious thought, she handed him the eviction notice. He read it quickly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "This is Henderson's doing," he said. It wasn't a question. "He's trying to steal my land because I won't share his bed," Zephyr confirmed bitterly. "And he might succeed. The only copy of my deed was registered with Judge Miller, whose records conveniently burned last month." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Do you have anything else?" "Any paperwork your father might have kept. There's a strongbox in the cabin. I've never opened it, never needed to until now." "May I help you look through it?" She hesitated only briefly. Under normal circumstances, inviting a man she barely knew into her home would be scandalously improper. But these weren't normal circumstances, and something told her Kieran O'Malley could be trusted. "Please," she said, retrieving her packages. "I could use an extra pair of eyes." Inside, the cabin was simple but neat, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts providing comfort against the rustic background. Zephyr set her purchases on the kitchen table and crossed to a trunk in the corner of the main room. "It's in here somewhere," she said, kneeling to search through the contents. "Father always kept important documents locked away." Kieran set the wildflowers in a jar of water before joining her. Together, they carefully removed folded linens and mementos until they found a small metal box at the bottom of the trunk. "This must be it," Zephyr said, lifting it out, "but I don't know where he kept the key." Kieran examined the lock. "May I?" At her nod, he withdrew a small knife from his boot and worked at the mechanism with surprising dexterity. Within moments, there was a soft click, and the lid popped open. Inside were several documents: her parents' marriage certificate, her own birth record, letters her father had written to her mother during his time away working the mines. At the very bottom, she found what they were looking for: a handwritten deed to the property, signed by her father and witnessed by Judge Miller, with an additional signature from a man named William Tanner. "This is it," she breathed, scanning the document, "but it's not the official copy." "Will it be enough?" Kieran read over her shoulder. "The witness signatures help. This Tanner fellow, do you know him?" Zephyr frowned, trying to place the name. "I think he was a friend of my father's from his mining days. I don't recall meeting him." "If he's still alive, his testimony could support your claim." Hope flickered to life within her. "Father kept a journal. He might have mentioned where Tanner went after the mine closed." As the evening deepened into night, they pored over Jacob Fielding's journal together, sitting side by side at the kitchen table. Zephyr prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, which they shared as they searched for any mention of William Tanner. "Here," Kieran said eventually, pointing to an entry dated 3 years prior. "It says Tanner headed to Silver Creek when the vein played out. That's only about 40 miles north of here." "He could still be there," Zephyr said, excitement rising in her voice. "If I could find him, get him to testify that he witnessed the deed signing." "It might be enough to counter Henderson's claim," Kieran finished, his dark eyes meeting hers across the table. In the lamplight, they were warm as ember, full of determination that matched her own. "I could ride to Silver Creek tomorrow," she began, but Kieran shook his head. "You shouldn't go alone. The road can be dangerous, especially for a woman traveling solo." "I'm not exactly defenseless," Zephyr countered, nodding toward the rifle mounted above the door. "I don't doubt your courage or capability," he said gently. "But Henderson has eyes everywhere. If he learns you're looking for evidence against him, he might take steps to stop you." The implication sent a chill through her. She knew Henderson was ruthless, but would he resort to violence to get what he wanted? The bruise on her cheek suggested he might. "I could come with you," Kieran offered. Zephyr gave him a sad smile. "And lose your job before you even start." "Henderson would fire you the moment he learned you were helping me." "Some things are more important than a job," he replied seriously, "like standing up for what's right." For a long moment, Zephyr simply looked at him, trying to understand this man who seemed to have stepped out of nowhere into her life at precisely the moment she needed an ally. "Why are you helping me, Kieran? You barely know me." He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Where I come from, my mother raised me to believe that a man's character is defined by how he treats those who can do nothing for him in return." He held her gaze steadily. "But the truth is, you're not doing nothing for me, Zephyr. You've reminded me why I came west in the first place: for freedom, for the chance to stand up for what's right without the weight of the past holding me down." His honesty touched something deep within her. For so long, she'd been fighting alone, convinced that independence meant solitude. But perhaps true strength lay in knowing when to accept help. "We'll leave at first light," she decided. "I'll send word to Mrs. Chen that I need a few days. Silver Creek isn't far. We can be there and back within the week." Kieran nodded. "I'll head back to town tonight and make arrangements." "Meet you here at dawn." "Yes," she agreed. Then, impulsively, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Kieran. Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful." He turned his hand to hold hers properly, his touch warm and reassuring. "We'll find Tanner, Zephyr, I promise." As they stood on her porch in the gathering darkness, an unexpected awkwardness fell between them. Kieran handed her the wildflowers he'd brought, now neatly arranged in a jar. "These are beautiful," she said softly. "No one's brought me flowers since my father picked daisies on my 16th birthday." "Then they're long overdue," he replied with a gentle smile. "Every woman deserves flowers now and then." In the silver moonlight, his features were cast in shadow, but Zephyr could feel the intensity of his gaze. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, and more surprisingly, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, he took a respectful step back. "Dawn tomorrow," he reminded her. "Be ready to ride." She watched him mount his horse and disappear into the night, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Hope and fear battled for dominance, hope that they might find Tanner and save her home, fear that Henderson's influence might reach even further than she imagined. But alongside these familiar concerns was something new, a fluttering anticipation at the thought of spending several days traveling with Kieran O'Malley. It was dangerous, this growing attraction to a man she barely knew. Yet somehow, the danger only added to the thrill of possibility that hummed through her veins as she prepared for their journey. The stars watched silently overhead as Redemption Creek settled into night, unaware that the first threads of a love story were being woven beneath their distant light, a love born of adversity and mutual respect, the rarest kind of all. True to his word, Kieran arrived at dawn, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. Zephyr was ready, dressed in her most practical riding clothes, a split skirt that allowed her to ride astride and a sturdy jacket to ward off the morning chill. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her father's old saddlebags were packed with necessities for the journey. "You look ready for adventure," Kieran commented, his approving gaze taking in her practical attire. "I've learned that vanity has no place on the trail," she replied, securing the last of her belongings to Willow's saddle. "Though my mother would be scandalized to see me in this outfit, I think she'd be proud to see her daughter's determination," he countered. "Ready." Zephyr cast one last glance at the homestead, the garden she'd carefully tended, the cabin that held all her memories. "Ready," she affirmed, mounting her horse with practiced ease. They rode east, taking a less traveled route to avoid being seen leaving together from Redemption Creek. The morning was glorious, the air crisp and scented with sage and pine. Despite the gravity of their mission, Zephyr found herself enjoying the journey and the company. "Tell me about Silver Creek," Kieran said as they navigated a rocky incline. "Have you been there before?" "Once when I was a girl," she replied. "Father took me along on a supply run. It was smaller than Redemption Creek then, but with the silver mines still producing, it might have grown since." "And this Tanner fellow your father's journal mentioned he was a mining engineer," Zephyr nodded. "Father spoke highly of him, said he was educated back east but preferred the freedom of the frontier." She glanced at Kieran curiously. "What about you? Where did you learn to handle horses?" A shadow passed over his face. "My father raised thoroughbreds in Kentucky. I grew up among them, learned their ways before I could properly walk." "Kentucky's a long way from Wyoming," she observed. "What brought you west?" He was quiet for a moment, and Zephyr thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. "After the war, things changed. My father died and the farm went to my older brother. We disagreed about the future of the family business. I decided a fresh start was best for everyone." The way he spoke told Zephyr there was more to the story, perhaps much more, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West had left something behind. It was an unspoken rule not to dig too deeply into another's past unless invited. "Well, I'm glad your fresh start brought you to Redemption Creek," she said instead, "even if the circumstances are less than ideal." His smile returned, warming his eyes. "So am I, Miss Fielding, so am I." They made good progress that first day, covering nearly half the distance to Silver Creek. As the sun began its descent, they made camp near a small stream where a stand of cottonwoods offered shelter. Kieran proved as competent at making camp as he was with horses, quickly gathering wood for a fire while Zephyr tended to their mounts. They worked together with an easy rhythm that felt remarkably natural for two people who had met only days ago. "You've done this before," Kieran commented as Zephyr efficiently prepared their simple supper over the fire. "Most women I've known would be complaining about the lack of proper accommodations by now." She laughed, the sound unexpectedly light after days of worry. "My father believed girls should learn the same survival skills as boys. Mother tried to turn me into a proper lady, but I'm afraid the lessons on embroidery and deportment never quite took hold the way tracking and shooting did." "A woman of many talents," he said appreciatively. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Sadness tinged her voice as she handed Kieran a tin plate of beans and salt pork. I miss him every day. They ate in companionable silence as darkness settled around them. Stars appeared one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, more than Zephyr could count if she had a lifetime to try. It's beautiful out here, Kieran said softly, gazing upward. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way, reminds you there's something bigger than your troubles. That's exactly how I feel, Zephyr replied, surprised at how perfectly he'd articulated her own thoughts. Whenever things seem impossible in town, I look up at night and remember that these same stars have witnessed thousands of years of human struggles. Somehow it puts my problems in perspective. A philosopher as well as a sharpshooter, he teased. You continue to surprise me, Zephyr Fielding. She smiled, enjoying the way he said her name like it was something precious. I suspect there's much we don't know about each other yet, Kieran O'Malley. I look forward to learning, he replied, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. Later, as they prepared for sleep on opposite sides of the fire, Zephyr found herself watching Kieran covertly as he spread his bedroll. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safer than she had in months. Kieran, she said quietly as he settled in for the night. Thank you for doing this. You didn't have to. He propped himself up on one elbow, regarding her across the dying embers. Some things a man does because he has to, he said seriously. Others he does because not doing them would make him less than he wants to be. He paused. Helping you falls into the second category. With those words hanging in the night air between them, Zephyr drifted into the most peaceful sleep she'd known since her father's death, lulled by the gentle sounds of the wilderness and the reassuring presence of her unexpected ally. The next day dawned clear and warm. They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail again by sunrise. As they rode, conversation flowed easily between them, covering everything from favorite books to opinions on the increasing settlement of the West. Progress can't be stopped, Kieran said as they discussed the railroad's expansion, but I can't help wondering what's lost in the rush to civilize this land. The freedom, Zephyr replied without hesitation. That's what's being lost. Every new town, every new law brings structure, which isn't always bad, but it also brings constraints, especially for those who don't fit neatly into society's expectations. People like you, he observed, and you, I suspect. She shot him a knowing glance. I don't imagine you came west just to break horses for wealthy ranchers, he chuckled. Touché, I've always believed a person should be judged by their actions, not by where they were born or how much money they have. That philosophy wasn't particularly popular in certain circles back east. They were passing through a narrow canyon when Kieran suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. Zephyr reined in immediately, alert to the tension in his posture. What is it? She whispered. Not sure, he murmured, scanning the rocky slopes on either side. Thought I heard something. They sat motionless for several long moments, listening intently. The only sounds were the soft shuffling of their horses and the distant call of a hawk. Maybe it was, Zephyr began, but her words were cut short by the sharp crack of a rifle shot. Rock splinters flew as the bullet struck just inches from Willow's front hoof. The mare reared in panic, and Zephyr fought to control her while Kieran drew his revolver in one fluid motion. Into the trees, he shouted, pointing toward a small grove of pines to their right. Now. They spurred their horses toward cover as two more shots rang out, kicking up dust at their heels. Zephyr's heart pounded in her ears as they reached the relative safety of the trees and dismounted quickly, leading their nervous animals deeper into the grove. Are you hit? Kieran asked urgently, his eyes scanning her for injuries. No, I'm fine, she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. Who's shooting at us? I'd bet good money they're Henderson's men, Kieran replied grimly, tying his horse to a low branch. Stay here with the horses. I'm going to circle back and see if I can get a better look. Before she could protest, he was gone, moving through the trees with surprising stealth for such a large man. Zephyr drew her father's revolver from her saddlebag, checking that it was loaded and ready. She wouldn't be a passive target if the shooters found their hiding place. Long minutes passed in tense silence. The horses had calmed somewhat, but Zephyr remained vigilant, watching the edge of the tree line for any sign of movement. When a twig snapped behind her, she whirled, weapon raised. "It's just me," Kieran said softly, emerging from the shadows with his hands slightly raised. "Two men on the ridge above the canyon. They're gone now, rode off to the west." "Henderson's men?" she asked, lowering her gun. "Can't be certain, but the timing's suspicious." "They might have been following us since we left." He knelt beside her, his expression troubled. "This changes things, Zephyr. If Henderson knows we're looking for Tanner, he might send men ahead to Silver Creek to find him first." The realization hit her like a physical blow. "He could pay Tanner off or worse. We need to change our route," Kieran decided. "There's a longer trail that loops around to the north. It'll add a day to our journey, but we're less likely to run into an ambush. And what if they're already waiting in Silver Creek?" His jaw tightened. "Then we'll deal with that when we get there. For now, let's focus on reaching town in one piece." They waited another hour to ensure their pursuers were truly gone before setting out again, this time on the longer northern trail. The day grew hot as they climbed higher into the foothills, the air thinning and the landscape changing from prairie to pine forest. By late afternoon, they had reached a high plateau overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "We should make camp early tonight," Kieran suggested as they paused to rest the horses. "There's a small lake just beyond that ridge, good water, plenty of cover." Zephyr nodded her agreement, too tired to argue. The stress of the ambush had drained her, leaving her muscles aching from tension. The lake proved to be a hidden gem, a clear, spring-fed pool nestled in a small valley surrounded by pines. They made camp beneath a massive old-growth tree whose branches provided natural shelter. "You should rest," Kieran said once the horses were tended and a fire was crackling cheerfully. "I'll keep watch for a while." Too exhausted to protest, Zephyr stretched out on her bedroll, but sleep eluded her despite her fatigue. Her mind raced with worries about what would happen when they reached Silver Creek, whether Tanner would be there, whether his testimony would be enough to save her home. "You're thinking too loudly," Kieran commented from his position beside the fire. "Try counting stars instead of problems," she smiled despite herself. "There aren't enough stars for all my problems. Want to talk about it? Sometimes saying fears aloud makes them less powerful." Zephyr sat up, wrapping her arms around her knees. "I'm scared, Kieran," she admitted softly. "Not just about losing my home, but about what happens after. Where do I go? What do I do? I have no family left, no real prospects." He was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "You could leave Wyoming," he suggested. "Head further west, maybe to California or Oregon. I hear women have more opportunities there. And abandon everything my parents worked for, everything I've fought to keep." She shook her head firmly. "I can't do that. This land isn't just property to me, it's my heritage, my legacy." "Then we fight," Kieran said simply. "We find Tanner, we get his testimony, we take on Henderson and his corrupt sheriff. And if we lose," his eyes met hers across the fire, determination evident in their depths. "Then we find another way, but we don't give up." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Zephyr, not just hope, but a deeper feeling that she wasn't ready to name. This man she barely knew had become her strongest ally, risking his own future to help her fight for hers. "Why does it matter so much to you?" she asked, the question that had been nagging at her since he'd first offered his help. Kieran was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and weighted with memory. "Back in Kentucky, after the war, I watched powerful men take advantage of those who couldn't fight back. My brother was one of them, using his position to claim land that rightfully belonged to others, particularly formerly enslaved families who'd been promised property. His hands clenched into fists. I spoke against it, tried to stop him. We fought badly. I left rather than be part of the injustice." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I came west to escape that past, but when I saw Henderson treating you the way he does, saw how the whole town turned a blind eye to his cruelty. I realized I'd found the same fight in a different place, and this time I won't walk away." Zephyr moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said softly. "It must have been difficult to stand against your own family." "Harder to live with myself if I hadn't," he replied. Then, with a self-deprecating smile, he added, "Besides, you remind me of someone I used to know, a woman who never backed down from what she believed was right, no matter the cost." "Someone special to you?" Zephyr asked, surprised by the hint of jealousy that colored the question. Kieran nodded. "My mother. She died during the war, but her courage lives on in my memory." His eyes softened as he looked at Zephyr. "She would have liked you, said you had backbone and heart in equal measure. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, just like you." The simple compliment warmed Zephyr from within. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand, her smaller fingers intertwining with his larger ones. "Thank you for telling me," she said, "for trusting me with your past." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for being worth the trust." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. No more words were needed. Something profound had shifted between them, a connection deepening into something neither had expected to find on this journey. When Zephyr finally returned to her bedroll, sleep came easily, her dreams filled not with worries about the future, but with visions of possibility she hadn't dared imagine before. Morning arrived with a fine mist hanging over the lake, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. They broke camp quietly, both still processing the intimacy of the previous night's conversation. The trail leading north was steep and challenging, requiring their full concentration as they navigated rocky switchbacks and narrow passages. By midday, they had reached the highest point of their journey, a windswept ridge that offered panoramic views in all directions. "There," Kieran said, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley several miles ahead. "Silver Creek, we should reach it by nightfall." Zephyr felt a surge of anticipation mixed with apprehension. "Do you think Tanner will still be there after all this time?" "Only one way to find out," he replied. "But a mining engineer would be valuable in a town built on silver. If he's alive, chances are good he stayed." They descended carefully, the horses picking their way down the steep trail with practiced ease. As they drew closer to Silver Creek, signs of mining operations became evident: tailings piles, abandoned equipment, and the occasional small claim shack dotting the hillsides. The town itself was larger than Zephyr remembered, with several streets of substantial buildings radiating from a central square. Unlike many mining towns that boomed and busted in rapid succession, Silver Creek showed signs of stability: brick buildings, glass windows, even a small church with a proper steeple. "Where do we start looking for Tanner?" Kieran asked as they rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from locals. "The mining office would know if he's working any of the active claims," Zephyr suggested. "Or the saloon bartenders usually know most everyone in town." They decided to try the mining office first, tying their horses at a hitching post outside a solid brick building with Silver Creek Mining Co. painted in fading letters across its facade. Inside, a bespectacled clerk looked up from a ledger as they entered. "Help you folks?" he asked, eyeing their dust-covered travel clothes with mild suspicion. "We're looking for a man named William Tanner," Zephyr explained. "He would have come here about 3 years ago. He's a mining engineer." Recognition flickered across the clerk's face. "Tanner, sure, he's still around. Works as a consultant for several of the smaller operations." He peered at them more closely. "You friends of his?" "My father was," Zephyr said. "Jacob Fielding. They worked together at the Blackwater mine near Redemption Creek." "Fielding," the clerk mused. "Can't say I recall the name, but Tanner's mentioned Blackwater a time or two." He reached for a pencil and scrap of paper. "Tanner lives above the assayer's office, 2 blocks down, usually stops by the Silver Dollar Saloon around supper time." Thanking the clerk, they left with directions to both locations. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows down the street. "Supper time's not far off," Kieran observed. "Want to try the saloon first?" Zephyr nodded her agreement, conscious of how dusty and travel-worn she must look. In Redemption Creek, her appearance often drew disapproving glances. She hoped Silver Creek might be more accepting of a woman who didn't conform to Eastern standards of propriety. The Silver Dollar Saloon was busy but not rowdy, filled with miners and townspeople enjoying an early evening drink. Zephyr felt the usual stares as she entered. A woman in a saloon was still an unusual sight, especially one dressed for the trail rather than for entertaining men. Kieran placed a protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the bar. "2 whiskeys," he ordered, maintaining a casual demeanor while scanning the room for anyone matching what little description they had of Tanner. The bartender, a burly man with an impressive mustache, served their drinks with a curious glance at Zephyr. "Don't get many ladies in here," he commented. "Especially not ones dressed for riding." "I'm looking for William Tanner," she said directly. "I was told he comes here regularly." The bartender's eyebrows rose. "Bill, sure, he'll be in shortly, always stops by after finishing at the assayer's office." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Mind if I ask why you're looking for him? Bill's a good customer and a better friend, don't want no trouble coming his way." "No trouble," Kieran assured him. "Miss Fielding here is the daughter of an old colleague of his. We've come a fair distance to speak with him about a personal matter." "Fielding, you say?" The bartender's expression cleared. "Any relation to Jake Fielding from over Redemption Creek way?" "My father," Zephyr confirmed, hope rising in her chest. "Did you know him?" "Met him once when he came through with the ore samples. Decent fellow." He nodded toward the batwing doors. "Speak of the devil, there's Bill now." A lean, silver-haired man had just entered the saloon, pausing to remove his hat and dust it against his leg before proceeding to the bar. His face was weathered but intelligent, with keen eyes that took in the room in a single sweeping glance. "Evening, Harry," he greeted the bartender. "The usual, if you please." "Got some folks here looking for you, Bill," Harry replied, pouring a measure of whiskey. "Say they're connected to Jake Fielding." Tanner turned, studying Zephyr with undisguised curiosity. "Jake Fielding? Good Lord, it's been years." His gaze sharpened. "You'd be his daughter, then, the one he was always bragging about." "Zephyr Fielding," she confirmed, extending her hand. "And this is Kieran O'Malley. We've ridden from Redemption Creek to find you, Mr. Tanner." Tanner shook her hand firmly, then Kieran's. "Must be important to bring you all this way. Jake's still working that homestead of his." A shadow crossed Zephyr's face. "Father passed away last winter, mining accident, damn." Tanner's expression fell. "I'm sorry to hear that. Jake was a good man, one of the best I knew in the business." He gestured to a quiet table in the corner. "Come sit. Tell me what brings you here." Over the next hour, Zephyr explained her situation: her father's death, Henderson's attempts to claim her land, the missing official deed, and the discovery of Tanner's name on the handwritten copy. Kieran added details about the ambush on the trail, confirming their suspicions that Henderson had sent men to stop them. Tanner listened intently, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When they finished, he drained his whiskey and signaled for another round. "Henderson," he spat the name like it tasted foul. "I remember him well. Tried to muscle in on the Blackwater operation before it played out. Jake stood up to him then, too." "Then you do remember witnessing the deed signing?" Zephyr asked eagerly. Tanner nodded slowly. "I do. It was right before I left for Silver Creek. Jake was concerned about his health, even then wanted to make sure you'd have clear title to the land if anything happened to him." He frowned. "But there should be an official copy in the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne, not just with the local judge." "Father never mentioned that," Zephyr said, hope kindling anew. "Are you certain?" "Positive. I recommended it myself, knowing how things can go missing in these small town offices." He gave her a sympathetic look. "Judge Miller was a good man, but his clerk was known to misplace things, especially when properly compensated to do so." Kieran leaned forward. "Would you be willing to sign a statement confirming you witnessed the original deed, and possibly travel to Redemption Creek to testify if needed?" Tanner didn't hesitate. "Of course, Jake Fielding stood by me during the worst time of my life. Least I can do is return the favor for his daughter." His eyes twinkled as he looked at Zephyr. "Besides, sounds like Henderson needs taking down a peg or two. I'd enjoy being part of that." Relief washed over Zephyr in a dizzying wave. They had found Tanner, and he remembered. Better yet, there might be another copy of the deed in Cheyenne. For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, she felt genuine hope that she might win this fight. "We should celebrate," Kieran suggested, smiling at her obvious relief. "Mr. Tanner, would you join us for dinner, our treat?" "I'd be honored," Tanner agreed. "And please call me Bill. Any daughter of Jake's is family as far as I'm concerned." They moved to the saloon's small dining area, where the food proved surprisingly good. Over a hearty meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Bill shared stories of his time working with Jacob Fielding, painting a picture of her father that filled in gaps in Zephyr's own memories. "Your father was the most honest man I ever met," Bill said, his eyes distant with recollection. "Wouldn't compromise his principles for all the gold in California. That's rare in mining country." "He taught me the same values," Zephyr replied softly. "Though they haven't made life easy in Redemption Creek," Bill snorted. "Easy living isn't worth much if you have to sacrifice who you are to get it." He glanced between Zephyr and Kieran. "You two make a good team. How long have you been together?" The question caught Zephyr off guard. "Oh, we're not that is. We only met a few days ago. Kieran's been kind enough to help me with this situation." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Kieran said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "It's about doing what's right." Something in his gaze made Zephyr's cheeks warm. She looked away, flustered by the intensity she saw there. Bill watched this exchange with knowing amusement. "Well, whatever brought you together, I'm glad you found me. First thing tomorrow, I'll write out that statement and have it properly witnessed. Then we can discuss next steps." By the time they finished dinner, the saloon had grown crowded and noisy. Bill suggested they continue their conversation at his lodgings above the assayer's office, where it would be quieter and more private. Outside, the night was cool and clear, the street illuminated by light spilling from shop windows and the occasional street lamp. As they walked, Zephyr found herself unexpectedly relaxed, the burden of her worries lightened by their successful mission. Bill's quarters were modest but comfortable, comprising 2 small rooms above the business he partly owned. While he rummaged for paper and ink to draft his statement, Zephyr wandered to the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar town. "We did it," Kieran said softly, coming to stand beside her. "We found him." She turned to face him, unable to contain her smile. "We did, I can hardly believe it." On impulse, she reached for his hand. "Thank you, I couldn't have done this without you." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers down her spine. "You underestimate yourself, Zephyr Fielding. You're the strongest woman I've ever met." Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Zephyr was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. The moment was interrupted by Bill's return. "Here we are," he announced, setting writing materials on a small table. "Let's get this statement down while the details are fresh in my mind." They spent the next hour carefully composing a document that detailed Bill's recollections of witnessing the deed signing, including the date, the specific property boundaries, and confirmation that Jacob Fielding had full legal ownership with the intention of passing it to his daughter. "This should help," Bill said as he signed the completed statement with a flourish. "Tomorrow morning I'll have the town's notary witness my signature to make it official, but your best bet is still finding that copy in Cheyenne." "Cheyenne's a 5-day ride from here," Kieran pointed out. "And Henderson's 30-day deadline will be ticking away." Bill stroked his silver beard thoughtfully. "The stage runs to Cheyenne twice weekly. Next one leaves tomorrow afternoon. It's faster than riding. You could be there in 2 days. And Henderson's men are less likely to trouble you on a public stage," Kieran added, nodding his approval of the plan. "What about you?" Zephyr asked him. "Will you come to Cheyenne as well?" A shadow crossed his face. "I should head back to Redemption Creek. Keep an eye on your property. If Henderson realizes we've found Tanner, he might try something desperate." The thought of separating from Kieran sent an unexpected pang through Zephyr's heart, but she recognized the logic of his suggestion. Her homestead was vulnerable, and Henderson wasn't above using underhanded tactics to get what he wanted. "I could go to Cheyenne alone," she said, though the prospect was daunting. If Bill's statement is notarized tomorrow, I'll have some protection at least. Nonsense, Bill interjected. I'll go with you. I have business in Cheyenne anyway, and 2 travelers are safer than 1. He glanced at Kieran. You can head back to Redemption Creek knowing she's in good hands. Relief and gratitude washed over Zephyr. Are you sure? It's a lot to ask. I insist, Bill said firmly. Jake would expect nothing less. With their plans settled, they bid Bill goodnight and headed to the town's small hotel, where Kieran secured 2 rooms for the night. Standing in the narrow hallway outside their adjacent doors, Zephyr found herself reluctant to say goodnight. You should get some rest, Kieran said gently. Tomorrow we'll be busy. I know. She hesitated, then added, it feels strange to think we'll be going our separate ways tomorrow. I've grown accustomed to your company. His expression softened. It's only temporary, Zephyr. I'll be waiting when you return to Redemption Creek. He reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering against her cheek. Be careful in Cheyenne. Trust Tanner, but keep your wits about you. Henderson's influence might reach further than we know. I will, she promised. You be careful too. Don't confront Henderson directly. He's dangerous when threatened. Kieran nodded, though something in his eyes suggested he wasn't making any promises on that front. For a heartbeat, they stood facing each other in the dim hallway, the air between them heavy with words unsaid and feelings unexplored. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, Kieran leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a demand. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, gauging her reaction. Zephyr answered by rising on her tiptoes to kiss him again, her hands coming to rest against his chest. This time the kiss deepened, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Her heart raced as she yielded to feelings she'd been fighting since they'd met attraction, yes, but also a deeper connection that had formed through shared danger and mutual respect. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his voice a husky whisper. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you in that saloon, standing tall despite everything. I'm glad you waited until now, she murmured, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. It means more this way. He smiled, reluctantly releasing her. Get some sleep, Zephyr. Tomorrow brings us one step closer to securing your future. Our future, she corrected without thinking, his eyes darkened with emotion. I like the sound of that. With one last lingering glance, they parted, each entering their own room. Zephyr leaned against her closed door, fingers touching her lips in wonder. In the midst of fighting for her home, she had somehow found something equally precious, a man who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it. As she prepared for bed, Zephyr realized that whatever happened in Cheyenne, her life had already changed irrevocably. For the first time since her father's death, she was thinking of the future with hope rather than dread, and Kieran O'Malley featured prominently in those thoughts. Morning arrived with a sense of purpose. After a quick breakfast, they met Bill at the assayer's office, where the town notary officially witnessed his signature on the statement. With that crucial document secured, they made arrangements for the afternoon stage to Cheyenne. Parting from Kieran proved harder than Zephyr had anticipated. They stood beside his saddled horse at the edge of town, trying to say goodbye with Bill waiting tactfully out of earshot. 2 days to Cheyenne, probably 3 more to find the deed and return, Kieran calculated. I'll watch over your homestead until then. Be careful, she urged, clutching his hand. If you sense any danger, go to Martha Sullivan. She'll help you. He nodded, then pulled her close for one last embrace. I'll be counting the days until you return, he murmured against her hair. Trust your instincts in Cheyenne. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I will, she promised, memorizing the feel of his arms around her. And Kieran, thank you for everything. His smile was tinged with sadness as he mounted his horse. This isn't goodbye, Zephyr, it's just until we meet again. She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared over a ridge. Only then did she turn back to where Bill waited patiently. Ready for Cheyenne? He asked kindly, squaring her shoulders. Zephyr nodded. Ready. The stagecoach journey was dusty and uncomfortable, but faster than traveling on horseback would have been. They arrived in Cheyenne late the following day, tired but determined. The territorial capital was far larger and more developed than either Redemption Creek or Silver Creek, with paved streets, brick buildings, and all the trappings of Eastern civilization. "We'll start at the land office first thing tomorrow," Bill said as they checked into a respectable hotel. "Try to get some rest. Bureaucracy requires stamina." He was right. The Territorial Land Office proved to be a maze of regulations and paperwork, staffed by clerks who seemed more interested in their lunch plans than in helping a young woman from a distant corner of Wyoming. It took Bill's authoritative presence and persistent questioning to finally locate someone willing to search the records for the Fielding deed. Hours turned into days as they navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth. Each morning brought renewed hope, each evening increasing frustration. By the third day, Zephyr was beginning to fear they had reached a dead end. "They're stonewalling us," she said despairingly as they left the office yet again without the document. "What if Henderson has connections here too?" "It's possible," Bill admitted, "but I have one more idea. An old friend of mine works as a legal advisor to the governor. If anyone can cut through this red tape, it's Elizabeth Holloway." Elizabeth proved to be a formidable ally, a sharp-witted widow who had turned her legal education into a position of considerable influence. After hearing their story, she immediately took up their cause, accompanying them to the land office the following morning. "I require access to the Redemption Creek property records from 1873, she informed the startled clerk, her tone brooking no argument. "By order of the governor's office." The mention of the governor worked magic. Within an hour, they were examining dusty ledgers and file boxes. And there, nestled among countless similar documents, was what they had been searching for: the official copy of Jacob Fielding's deed, properly registered and recorded with Zephyr named as his heir. "This is it," she breathed, carefully unfolding the yellowed paper. "Proof that the land is mine." Elizabeth studied the document with a professional eye. "This is legally binding. With this and Mr. Tanner's statement, Henderson's claim won't stand up to scrutiny." She glanced at Zephyr shrewdly, "though I suspect he won't give up without a fight." "Let him fight," Zephyr replied with newfound confidence. "I have the law on my side now." They made certified copies of the deed, one for Zephyr to keep, one to file with the local court in Redemption Creek, and one for Elizabeth to retain in case the others mysteriously disappeared. "You've been incredibly helpful," Zephyr told Elizabeth as they prepared to leave Cheyenne the following day. "How can I ever repay you?" The older woman smiled. "By standing your ground. The West needs more women willing to fight for what's theirs." She pressed Zephyr's hand warmly. "And perhaps someday you'll help another woman facing similar challenges." With the precious deed secured, Zephyr and Bill boarded the stage back toward Silver Creek, both eager to return to familiar territory. The journey seemed faster this time, buoyed by their success and the knowledge that Henderson's scheme had been thwarted. In Silver Creek, they paused only long enough for Bill to gather some belongings. He had decided to accompany Zephyr all the way to Redemption Creek, partly out of concern for her safety and partly from a desire to see Henderson's face when confronted with the truth. "Jake would want me there," he explained simply. "And I admit, I'm curious about this Kieran fellow of yours." Zephyr blushed at the implication. "He's not my anything, not officially." Bill's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Not yet, perhaps, but I've seen the way you look at each other. Some things don't need official declarations to be true." They rented horses for the journey back, taking the direct route this time. Zephyr's thoughts increasingly turned to Kieran as they drew closer to Redemption Creek. Had he managed to protect her homestead? Was he safe? And most troublingly, what if Henderson had discovered his role in helping her and taken revenge? These worries multiplied when they crested the final ridge overlooking her property and saw smoke rising from the direction of her cabin. "No," she gasped, spurring her horse forward recklessly. "Please, no." Bill followed close behind as they galloped toward the homestead. As they drew nearer, Zephyr's heart pounded with fear, but what they found was not what she had dreaded. The smoke came not from her burning cabin, but from a campfire beside it. Her home stood intact, and beside it, working to repair a section of fence, was Kieran O'Malley. He looked up at the sound of approaching horses, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun until he recognized Zephyr. His face broke into a wide smile as he dropped his tools and strode toward her. Zephyr barely waited for her horse to stop before dismounting and running to meet him. His arms opened to receive her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke volumes about the days they'd spent apart. "You're back," he murmured against her hair. "Thank God you're safe." "The cabin, I thought," she stammered, pulling back to look at his face. "When I saw the smoke, just cooking dinner," he assured her. "Everything's fine here, better than fine, actually." Setting her gently on her feet, Kieran nodded toward the barn, where Zephyr now noticed several unfamiliar horses grazing in the corral. "We have guests," he explained. "Martha Sullivan sent word that Henderson was planning something, so I called in some friends for help." From the direction of the barn came several men Zephyr didn't recognize, led by a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman whose bearing suggested authority. "Zephyr, this is Marshal James Cooper," Kieran introduced him. "He's been investigating Henderson for land fraud across 3 counties. Your case was exactly what he needed to build his case." The marshal tipped his hat respectfully. "Miss Fielding, your friend here tells me you've been having some trouble with James and Henderson." Still processing this unexpected turn of events, Zephyr nodded. "Yes, but we found proof that the land is legally mine." She gestured toward Bill, who had dismounted and was approaching. "This is William Tanner, who witnessed my father's deed signing, and we have the official copy from the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne." Marshal Cooper's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "That's excellent news. With your permission, I'd like to add your evidence to our case against Henderson. He's been pushing smaller ranchers and homesteaders off their land for years, but most were too intimidated to fight back." "Of course," Zephyr agreed readily. "Anything that helps stop him from doing this to others." As the marshal and his deputies conferred with Bill about his statement, Kieran drew Zephyr aside, his expression serious. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Henderson sent men here 2 days ago, tried to burn you out while I was in town meeting with the marshal. Martha warned me just in time." Horror washed over her. "Was anyone hurt?" He shook his head. "No, but it was close. Henderson's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous. Marshal Cooper wants to move against him tonight before he realizes you're back with the deed." "Tonight?" Zephyr glanced toward the gathering darkness. "What exactly does he have planned?" "A formal arrest at Henderson's ranch. The marshal has warrants for Henderson and Sheriff Wade both." Kieran's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "It's almost over, Zephyr. By morning, Henderson will be in custody and your land will be secure." The relief was almost overwhelming. After months of fighting alone, justice was finally within reach, but one question still nagged at her. "Kieran, what about your job at Henderson's ranch? Won't you be implicated when they learn you've been helping me?" A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "About that, I never actually started the job. After I left you in Silver Creek, I rode straight to the marshal's office in Laramie instead. I'd heard rumors about Cooper's investigation and thought your situation might interest him." Zephyr stared at him in amazement. "You gave up a job to help a woman you barely knew." His expression grew tender as he reached up to touch her cheek. "I think we both know you're not just a woman I barely knew, Zephyr. From the moment I saw you in that saloon, standing proud despite everything, I knew you were someone worth fighting for." Her heart swelled with emotions too complex to name. Before she could respond, Marshal Cooper approached, interrupting the moment. "We're heading out, O'Malley," he announced. "Miss Fielding, I suggest you stay here with Mr. Tanner. We'll send word once Henderson is in custody." Zephyr looked between the marshal and Kieran, suddenly reluctant to be separated again so soon after reuniting. "Be careful," she said, her eyes fixed on Kieran. "Henderson won't go quietly." "Which is why I need O'Malley with us," Cooper explained. "He knows the ranch layout from his reconnaissance." Kieran squeezed her hand one last time. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. With news that Henderson is finally facing justice, Zephyr watched them ride away, a mixture of hope and anxiety churning within her. Bill came to stand beside her, his presence comforting in its steadiness. "That's quite a man you've found," he commented as the riders disappeared into the gathering dusk. Reminds me of your father, same sense of right and wrong, same willingness to stand up for it. He is special, she agreed softly. I just hope. She couldn't finish the thought, fear of jinxing their good fortune stopping the words in her throat. Bill understood anyway. They'll be all right. Men like your Kieran and Marshall Cooper know what they're doing. He gestured toward the cabin. Now, how about we see about finishing that dinner he was preparing? I'm famished after our journey, and I suspect you are too. The hours of waiting were interminable. Zephyr and Bill ate, then sat by the fire discussing his memories of her father and his own adventures since leaving Redemption Creek. Despite his engaging stories, Zephyr found her attention constantly drawn to the window, straining to hear the sound of returning horses. It was well past midnight when they finally came the steady drumbeat of hooves approaching through the darkness. Zephyr rushed outside, a lantern held high to illuminate the yard. Marshall Cooper led the group, followed by his deputies and, to her immense relief, Kieran, riding tall and apparently unharmed. Behind them, bound and under guard, rode Jameson Henderson himself, his usually arrogant face set in lines of fury. "Miss Fielding," Cooper called as they entered the yard, "I believe this man has something to say to you." The marshal nudged his horse alongside Henderson's, his expression stern. "Go on, Henderson, say it like you agreed." Henderson's jaw worked as if he were chewing glass, but finally he spoke. "I withdraw any claim to the Fielding property," he ground out, "and acknowledge that Zephyr Fielding is its rightful owner." The words, forced though they were, lifted a weight from Zephyr's shoulders that she had carried for months. "And the other homesteaders you've threatened," she pressed, unwilling to accept victory for herself alone. Henderson glared, but Cooper nodded approvingly. "All claims will be reviewed by the territorial court," the marshal assured her. "Any land taken fraudulently will be returned to its rightful owners." As the deputies prepared to continue their journey to the Laramie jail with their prisoner, Kieran dismounted and approached Zephyr. His face was streaked with dust, and there was a small cut above his eyebrow, but his smile was triumphant. "He didn't go without a fight," he explained, noting her concerned glance at his injury, "but it's nothing serious. What happened to Sheriff Wade?" She asked, aware that the corrupt lawman wasn't among the prisoners. "Tried to run when we arrived. One of Henderson's men panicked and fired, thinking Wade was turning on them." Kieran's expression was grim. "Wade didn't make it." The news was sobering, a reminder that justice in the West often came at a cost. But as the marshal's party rode away with Henderson securely in custody, Zephyr felt the first true sense of safety she'd known since her father's death. Bill tactfully excused himself to tend to the horses, leaving Zephyr and Kieran alone by the cabin door. "It's over," she said, still hardly believing it. "Henderson can't hurt anyone anymore." "Thanks to you," Kieran replied. "Your courage inspired others to stand against him." The marshal said at least 5 other homesteaders have come forward with similar stories since I first contacted him. "And you," she added softly, "without your help I might have lost everything." He took her hands in his expression growing serious. "Zephyr, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been thinking about since we parted in Silver Creek." Her heart quickened at his tone. "What is it?" "I came west looking for a fresh start, a place where I could build something meaningful after losing my way back east." His eyes held her steadily. "I thought that meant finding land of my own, raising horses maybe, but meeting you changed everything." He took a deep breath. "I know it's fast, some would say too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. These past days without you made me realize I don't want a future that doesn't include you in it." Zephyr's breath caught as he continued. "I'm not asking for an answer right away. Just a chance to court you properly, to show you what kind of man I am, what kind of life we might build together." Joy bubbled up within her, unexpected and overwhelming. "Kieran O'Malley," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "are you asking to court me?" A smile spread across his face. "I am, Miss Fielding, with all the proper respect and honorable intentions a woman like you deserves." Impulsively, Zephyr rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that answered more eloquently than words could. When they parted, she was smiling through tears she hadn't realized had fallen. "I take it that's a yes," he murmured, his arms encircling her waist. "Yes," she confirmed. Though I should warn you, I'm still the same proud, stubborn woman Henderson tried to break. That won't change." Kieran's eyes shone with admiration as he gazed down at her. "That's what I love about you," he said, echoing his words from days earlier. "Your pride, your courage, your unwavering sense of right and wrong. I wouldn't change a single thing about you, Zephyr Fielding, not for all the gold in California." Under a sky filled with stars, they sealed their promise with another kiss, not an ending, but a beginning. The road ahead would have its challenges, as all worthwhile journeys do, but they would face them together, equal partners in whatever the future might hold. 3 years later, the Fielding O'Malley Ranch had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. The small homestead had expanded, with new pastures for Kieran's growing herd of horses and expanded fields where Zephyr's experimental crops thrived. A new wing had been added to the cabin to accommodate their growing family, their 1-year-old daughter, Mary Elizabeth, named for both their mothers, and the baby boy who would arrive before winter. Redemption Creek had changed too. After Henderson's conviction and imprisonment, the town had experienced a rebirth of sorts. Martha Sullivan's husband had taken over management of the Henderson Ranch, running it fairly and providing good jobs for many in the community. Mrs. Chen's dressmaking business had expanded, with Zephyr occasionally helping during busy seasons. The new sheriff, elected after Wade's death, was a former Pinkerton agent committed to upholding the law equally for all residents. Bill Tanner had stayed in Redemption Creek, partnering with another former mining engineer to establish an assayer's office that served the small-scale miners in the region. He was a frequent visitor to the ranch and had become Uncle Bill to little Mary. On this particular autumn evening, Zephyr stood on the porch of their home, watching as Kieran taught their daughter to ride on a gentle old pony he led around the yard. Mary's delighted giggles carried on the breeze, mingling with the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and chickens clucking in their newly built coop. Kieran looked up, catching Zephyr's eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as it had been on that night 3 years ago, when they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. If anything, it had deepened with time and shared experiences, the joy of their wedding day, the challenges of expanding the ranch, the miracle of Mary's birth, and now the anticipation of their second child. As dusk settled over the land that was truly and securely theirs, Kieran brought Mary to the porch, the sleepy child reaching for her mother with complete trust. "She's going to be just like you," Kieran observed as Zephyr settled their daughter on her hip. "Same determination, same spirit." "Poor you," Zephyr teased. "Two stubborn Fielding women to contend with," he laughed, pulling her gently against his side. "I wouldn't have it any other way. That Fielding pride is still what I love most about you both." As they stood together, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Zephyr reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first meeting in the saloon when she'd stood bruised but unbowed, to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a path of struggle and triumph, of standing firm in the face of injustice, and of finding strength in each other. She had refused to be broken by Henderson's cruelty, refused to surrender what was rightfully hers. And in doing so, she had found not just victory over her enemy, but something far more precious, a partner who valued her strength rather than fearing it, who loved her not despite her pride but because of it. In the gathering twilight, Kieran pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Happy," he murmured. Zephyr smiled, leaning into his embrace as their daughter dozed against her shoulder. "Completely," she replied. And in that simple word was contained all the gratitude, joy, and love that had transformed a lonely fight for survival into a life rich with purpose and possibility, a life built on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had only grown stronger with each challenge overcome together. The proud woman and the cowboy who loved her for that very pride had created something remarkable. Not just a home or a ranch, but a legacy of courage that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in the hearts of their children and all who heard their story of love and resilience in the wild Wyoming frontier.